It still takes you back to watching sci-fi movies and seeing something, 20 years ago, and all of a sudden, guess what? When you watched it 20 years ago, you thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Now it's here. You see it all the time type of stuff. Without creativity, without taking risk, nothing new happens. So what we need to be able to do is to foster the ability of people, businesses, families, individuals to take risk, but to reduce the potential downside of the risk that they take in that process. You name it, we insure it. We insure one and two person operations as they get started. We insure some of the biggest corporations in Japan, not only here, but outside of here. Because AIG has such an enormous global footprint, our opportunity to be in each market serving local needs and yet understanding how to aggregate that up at a global level is quite unique and special. And so, we can be at the very high end handling the biggest Japanese companies as they do global initiatives and do global business, and we can deal with the husband and wife ramen shop folks around the corner type of stuff. A little interesting tidbit, because we have such a large small business community. One of my biggest customer segments is sake brewers and shochu distillers, and those are fun customers to go visit. Our business in Japan, because of the nature of the way the market works here, is pretty different than what we do elsewhere in the world. We have an incredible market presence in the small business space. Typically, AIG is either high-end major commercial business, like we are in Europe and in the United States, or it tends to be very consumer in nature. So we have huge life and retirement business in the United States as well. So this is a bit different. This market in Japan is not like all other markets in the world for lots of different reasons. But for example, the dominant portion of the market here is automobile insurance. And that's probably going to be one of the most disrupted parts of this market for the next 10 years to come. So our focus in small business really evolved because we weren't local. We weren't a part of an investment cross-shareholding process, which is very common in the big businesses here in Japan. So we needed to find a space where we could compete and where we could build our own value proposition. And plenty of people in the Japanese market were playing at the household level, and plenty were paying at the big corporate level. Not much was paying attention to the small business space. So we focused on that and have for the last 45 years to a great degree of success. We've done a lot of different partnerships in Japan to make that work. We've focused on non-traditional or alternative ways to develop distribution. And so it doesn't necessarily look like other Japanese companies in this market, and it certainly doesn't look like other AIG companies around the world. So we're a bit unique in a lot of different respects. Insurance is an actuarial world. Okay, I like to say that insurance is one of the oldest professions in the world. Sadly, sometimes it's closely related to the oldest profession in the world. But we're a practice that looks at historical information and likelihood of events. Predictive capability is based upon our ability to analyze what happened historically. That's traditionally the way insurance has worked. But the way information is moving and the way people can tap into things today and the way you can reach globally to find ideas, to find information, et cetera, is unprecedented. And so our ability to think about this has to change. We have to become more predictive in this process and use the power of technology and the power of data and the ability to bring different discrete pieces of information together to actually build predictive models far more effectively than we have been historically. We would use historical data in the past to derive an underwriting decision or a pricing decision going forward. Now we've got to be able to say, well, wait a minute, cyber is every day something new. Every threat is evolving and new. So you can't necessarily rely on the historical context of things in order to predict the likely outcome going forward. So the challenge and the opportunity that's presented to an insurance player in this process is how do you rethink the information you need to drive your decisioning. to drive risk acceptance, to drive pricing, and to derive how much, what we would call retention. How much am I prepared to keep of that risk versus how much am I going to look to share? And technology is absolutely at the center of that future for us and the present for us at the same time. Understanding the difference and the departure that we need to go through from, I had 100,000 cases of this historically, now I can predict whether you or you or you is a better risk and how to price it. We don't have the luxury of doing that anymore, right? And so technology is at the center of that. Then if you take it into other dimensions, now you start to talk about, as you mentioned before, augmentative tools and capabilities. There may be things from our standpoint that in an insurance sense can help be educational or instructional that allow people to better understand where risk exists and how to navigate around it. Because truthfully, the best accident is the one that never happens, right? I always say that insurance is a necessary evil. My boss used to say it's a little like going to the dentist. You don't necessarily want to, but you need to. And so when we then think about how people view risk, it's a reactive process. And insurance is very much a reactive exercise. When something bad happens, you talk to your insurance company. So we want to change that model, and that's where technology, information, and ecosystems are so key to being able to connect with people in a more normal, daily interaction than having them think, oh, let me go check my insurance app. I've got this killer app on my smart device. Nobody's going to use it. It's not going to be high on your priority list first thing in the morning to say when you get up and you're brushing your teeth, okay, what's my insurance risk look like today, right? So using technology to be able to become more part of a normal dialogue that people have on a daily basis and enrich their understanding of what's gonna be around them and they're gonna be faced with over the course of the day, whether it's an individual or a business. How can we help them through technology better anticipate the challenges and the risks that they'll face and how to actually minimize them? Because growth doesn't happen if you don't take risk. Right? You can't be creative if you're not afraid to take risk, if you're afraid to fail. And so insurance needs to be able to play a different role going forward rather than just waiting for something bad to happen. It has to be assistive, augmentative, and predictive around helping people anticipate and therefore navigate around risk. We've been working with some different components and from a telematics standpoint, right? So it's a specific device that's plugged into the car, to the vehicle itself. And it feeds information real time through the cloud. And then that information is monitored by us. And when certain triggers events happen, it sends a tripwire to us to let us know that XYZ's happened. I was in Ireland recently, and our Irish operations done some pretty cool stuff with telematics. Traditionally, what is telematics? I give you a little device, you put it in your car, and then I use that information to decide whether you're a good risk or not, and I price you differently. The team in Ireland has done some very different things with it, and they use it on a daily basis to monitor young driver behaviors. And so with this device, first of all, they have the GPS capability to understand where the vehicle is at any one time. They can overlay that then upon mapping technology to understand what road was it. Is it a highway? Is it a city street? Is it a rural street, etc.? And they use the telematics then to monitor the speed. It's not just braking, etc., but it's speed. So we look for people to exceeding the speed limit, right? And how much are they exceeding the speed limit? So that we can begin to say, well, wait a minute, this person's behaving in the wrong fashion. We then use that information to say to them, hey, you've been twice now, you've been exceeding the speed limit by 40 kilometers in this kind of zone. A, that's bad behavior. B, that's increasing your risk of accident or injuring other people, etc. You need to correct your behavior. Here's what we'll do to help you, right? If after a couple more times they don't do that, then we say, sorry, we're not going to do business with you anymore, right? At the same time, and it wasn't even initially anticipated, I was amazed when I heard this, they can actually reconstruct accidents now and understand who was going at what speed, how fast did they take the corner, were they on the right side of the road or not, et cetera. They've been able to use it to detect fraud, right? So, we had a situation where somebody rammed into a light pole 6 times, right, before they created the accident outcome that they wanted in that process. And we could retrace that through the telematics. Or we were able to retrace that a couple of people conspired to create an accident, and then somebody came in and claimed medical disability and injuries, et cetera. And when we then went back and researched it, we discovered that through the telematics, that the vehicle of the injured party was actually at the house of the person who had the accident with them a week before, right, when they clearly, prepared this whole game plan together to create this accident, right? Did an accident happen? Yeah. But it was faked, right? It was orchestrated, and these people had conspired to do it beforehand. So the telematics was an ability for us to be able to go back and say, wait a minute, there's a fraud been committed here. Or in the case of an accident, we've been able to say, well, wait a minute, the guy lost control of the car here. This is what happened, and we can recreate that almost digitally in that process, which has been pretty fascinating. So the next step, obviously, is because it's real-time information, we can actually begin to act upon an accident or an injury or something with almost immediate attention. So pretty cool. Different, but it's the type of thing that it's changing the way not only we can serve our customers, but the whole process is changing their expectations. In the past, the insurance experience, as I said before, is kind of like going to the dentist. You did it because you had to, not because you wanted to, right? But as we look to the future, more and more of what people are expecting isn't driven by my competitors' experience and how my customers feel. It's going to be driven by how they deal with Google or how they deal with, Amazon, et cetera. That's how they're going to derive an expectation around what we do for them. And so we have to stop thinking like an insurance company, because the disruption is not going to come technically from within the insurance industry. And I think that's where, for example, some of the fintechs that I've seen, the startups in this space, they get it. They've understood that they're really about the experience. It's really about understanding how to make that more seamless, how to make it more intuitive for customers, and how it leverages an ecosystem environment to ensure that you're getting this truly, terrific experience, regardless of what it is you're transacting, whether you're insuring something, whether you're repairing something, whether you're preventing something, whether you're buying something, et cetera. And so to us, that's where the real exciting space will be as we go forward. It's rethinking that and appreciating how the customer's best experience is the one that they're going to want us to be able to deliver. And how do we then do that? This is where technology adds a new dimension. The ability to work with unstructured data with tools in today's world is revolutionary compared to the way we used to do this. Just 10 years ago, you had to understand the data nomenclature. You had to understand the hierarchy. Think about it. It was only a little while ago that we introduced relational databases, let alone hierarchical databases, right? Now in comes unstructured data and the ability to start to say, I'm going to marry some of my information. I'm going to marry some government third-party information. I'm going to marry some social media activity. I'm going to create some digital imagery into this process and incorporate that into this. The ability of the tools that we have at our disposal today to integrate that and make sense out of it is nothing short of amazing, right? Really, from my standpoint, I was in India last week looking at different retail experiences that had been pioneered, that were being rolled out around the world. And I have to admit, I was a bit dumbstruck by some of the stuff I was looking at. But by the same token, the beauty of it was the ability to, in very, very nanosecond, sound bites, be able to marry an image with this data, with this additional, third-party source of information, and produce a proposition to somebody. It's just spectacular, right? And so today, to me, it's not just about the multiple sources of information. It's about the tool set's ability to allow you to make the inferences and the connectivity and the relationships between it in ways in which, 10 years ago we wouldn't even thought about. It still takes you back to watching sci-fi movies and seeing something, 20 years ago, and all of a sudden, guess what? When you watched it 20 years ago, you thought, wow, that's pretty cool. Now it's here. You see it all the time type of stuff, So whether it was the Jetsons commercial when you were a kid and the video capability and, scooters running around in the sky and everything else, this stuff is real. It's pretty cool. And the ability to take it into this ancient insurance industry and really, really revolutionize that is really quite fascinating. The beauty of this too is that the world keeps shrinking, right? And so something that's being done in New Zealand today is absolutely going to be on the radar for us tomorrow here, and say, well, why can't we do that? And what nuance do we need to add to it to ensure that it has the right feel with my client base locally in Japan? But the whole idea of how these capabilities change the game that's what makes it fun. If I came in here and sat behind my desk and sat here staring at insurance applications and brochures the way people always have, I'd be bored to tears. And I wouldn't want to buy that product either, just like my client doesn't want to buy it, right? So how we can bring that freshness to it and think about it from their eyes, not our eyes, that's a huge opportunity for us. And I think it's a huge ask of the consumer world and the commercial world of their insurers. If I can do all these great things over here when I purchase something from this online group, when I make my reservation to do the following on this, why can't I do this with the insurance company? Right? And the answers that we've given in the past are pretty feeble, pretty lame. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. We're quite excited about that, and how, at least in Japan, the fun thing of it is that I'm the 4th largest insurance company in Japan. I'm bigger than all the others combined, but there's 3 in front of me that are 80% plus percent of the market, right? And they have a unique challenge. They can't afford to get it wrong, right? Because there's too much to lose. I'm 4th largest with about 7-8% of the market. I got everything to gain, right? And so for us, we really feel strongly that we can and should be trying to drive disruption and innovation and pioneer things, because our global presence means that we do business in 100 plus countries around the world, directly or through partners, et cetera. How do we bring that value and expertise to Japan and give it the local twist? That's the piece that we just got to make sure that we do it in a way that appeals to that clientele. Information about me is mine, not someone else's. And I believe that we haven't yet seen that play itself all the way out. There's a lot of context around information and access to it, and what you're eligible to have and to use. In Europe, I'll give you a different example. In today's DNA testing that you can do, right? I can turn around, and if I have your DNA test, I can predict with a pretty high degree of accuracy how long you're going to live, what illnesses you're likely to contract, et cetera. So can I ask a customer to do that? Am I underwriting per se now, or am I using science in a very different dimension? And one of my bosses in the past has used the question of the future in insurance is going to be do we have the authority to underwrite? And what he means by that was that, if I ask you to provide this DNA sample to me, you do a blood test, you do whatever, and it tells me things that you may not necessarily know, am I authorized to use that? And that the world hasn't figured that out yet. I know this is a very relevant issue in Japan right now from the regulator standpoint, is what are you discriminating against somebody if you actually know what their likely outcome is going to be and when, et cetera? So we'll wrestle with that for a while, I think. And public opinion, regulatory climates, et cetera, are going to continue to challenge the way in which we incorporate information. I mean, you use a wearable, right? If I ask you to use the wearable and you therefore authorize me to use that information in my process of managing you and underwriting you, where does the line get drawn? the speed with which things are going to get introduced as we go forward is going to just continue to accelerate. The one benefit that I will say to this is that in a world that grows, in a world that's financially successful, there's always capital. There's always capacity. I think what we all need to do is to understand, to me, it's more around doing the homework you can, engaging in different ways with academics, with industrialists, et cetera, to understand their interpretation of likely outcomes. I think the challenge in a lot of these things is to understand aggregation. So in the risk business, you need to be able to understand how much exposure do I have to an event or to a technology or to an outcome, right? And globally, where regulators get involved, is how much global exposure is there to these things. I fear, for example, that cyber, if we're not careful, is the next asbestos, right, to the insurance industry, because the way in which state actors perform, right, it is their intent to destabilize. It is their intent to have significant, territorial or even global implications. And so part of the challenge is not so much about getting the individual risk selection right. It's understanding how the aggregate exposure of that risk on a grander scale, whether it be across different locations, across different organizations, across different behavioral traits, et cetera. Understanding that, and that's where some of these new technology capabilities around data amalgamation and unstructured data combinations can be meaningful. That's really where the ultimate bet gets made. How much are you putting on the table here to defend this? Individual cases, you hit some, you miss some. You want to hit more than you miss, and you want to hit more bigger than you lose at the same time. But I think you do as much modeling as you can. You do as much attempting to draw analogies to similar types of situations historically, and you get smart people around the room and say, "What if?" That doesn't sound terribly scientific, right? But I think at the same time, the truth is that there's a little bit of a gamble in this. And insurance is always a little bit about a gamble. You're insuring against a potential downside outcome. It doesn't happen a lot. When it does, how big is it when it happens, right? And understanding that is not new, right? That's stuff that we're pretty good at, right? So it's really about trying to look at the worst case scenarios, understand the exposure in those worst case scenarios, and how well you've protected yourself from it. I think we will, with just a little bit more time, find that there's some pretty darn good AI ability out there to be able to help, anticipate and divert or correct around how protection can take place. I think it becomes more dynamic, I guess is what I'm saying. I believe that insurance is not a reactive thing going forward. It's a dynamic thing going forward. And so when we look to this in the future, we need to be creative and innovative around how we understand how risk evolves and how people don't take a static view to that, but they take a dynamic view to it. Without creativity, without taking risk, nothing new happens. So what we need to be able to do is to foster the ability of people, businesses, families, individuals to take risk, but to reduce the potential downside of the risk that they take in that process. And for that to happen, we've got to innovate how we get information to people, how we give them experience that they would not have had themselves, or they would only have it too late in the game. And so that's a whole part of our shift as we move to the future here in Japan. It's about different kind of partnerships, not necessarily with the distribution people who sell my product, but my customer, What is it that they do daily? Are they picking up their app and reading the local newspaper on their smartphone? Does that give me opportunities to interact with them because I can understand who that client is? I understand the article they're reading. I know that they've read 5 similar articles like that in the last 3 months. Therefore, maybe now's the time to prompt them with some information about, hey, you're insured with AIG. Did you know? Types of things. So that's where we're experimenting, and we're having some fun right now, trying to find different new innovative ways to let people know, let businesses know, this is on the horizon for you. What can you do to reduce it, minimize it, avoid it, eliminate it, et cetera, type of stuff. And that's going to keep changing. When people talk about autonomous drive vehicles, et cetera, is that going to mean that fewer and fewer people are going to get themselves insured for driving their car? Yeah, but that's going to take a long time to happen. But that's going to mean new risk. Now the manufacturers have the liability when an accident happens because they built a sensor that didn't work properly under right circumstances, et cetera, right? So risk changes, it's constantly changing. And our job is to ensure that we do as much as we can to understand how it acted in the past, how it's likely to act in the future, and what we can do to help people change behaviors, change actions, change outcomes, change lifestyles, change routes, to reduce the chance that they're going to face that risk or that they're going to have to overcome that risk on a daily basis. And that means it can't be, I call my insurance company when an accident happens. That's just not going to work anymore.
What should people do to make better use of technology in their life?
Well, it's a fascinating question. I would kind of maybe cheat and say I think the challenge really is still on us to figure out how to interact with them in a more meaningful, timely fashion, so that they can behave differently, so that they can take smarter actions, or they can take more informed decisions about threats and risks that they face in front of them. And I look at it, and I talk to my team, and I say, you're a customer every day, right? Hundreds of times. How you chose to get to work in the morning, whether you got coffee from the convenience store or the boutique place around the corner, what lunch you wanted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what drives your decisioning? It's different by individual. Some of them are driven by price, some want convenience, some want the wow, some want the keep it simple. We're never going to be able to prescribe that to people. We need to be able to respond to people in that process. So I don't mean to cop out in answering your question, but I do believe that it's on us to be able to recognize that people will look for things in different ways. They will look to interact in different ways. And they will be driven by the experience they had that most aligned with their preference. Was it expense? Was it wow? Was it convenience, et cetera? And we need to be able to figure out how do we respond to that. We can't be all things to all people. That's the first mistake most companies make, is that they try to do everything, right? So we need to be clear on segmentation. Who are the customers that we're going to be able to satisfy and serve? What is their expectation, and how are we going to deliver on it? And then I think it's a lot easier to make that marriage between how they use information and knowledge that we share with them more effectively to reduce risk as they go forward.